Hello, you are listening to The Sower, a podcast of the Ciceronian Society. To learn more about us and our programs to promote civic and cultural renewal, please visit ciceroniansociety.org. Some Sower episodes, including this one, are released in video as well as audio format, so if you're listening right now, check out our YouTube channel for the video. I'm Chris Anadale, podcast editor for the Society and occasional host of The Sower. My guest today is Nathaniel Fouch. He is assistant professor of law at Capital University School of Law in Columbus, Ohio, where he teaches criminal law and torts and studies state constitutional law, legal history, jurisprudence, appellate law, and religious liberty and conscience rights. He earned his Juris Doctor at the University of St. Thomas School of Law. He was also a Nisbet Fellow at our Society's March 2026 conference in Omaha, where he presented a paper titled The Relationship Between the Declaration of Independence and State Constitutions. Nathaniel, welcome to The Sower.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'm a big fan of your work. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the show after having listened to just about every episode myself while washing the dishes and scrubbing the floors, mostly after our 3 kids have gone to bed.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to see you here again after the conference in Omaha. Now, I guess full disclosure, yours was one of the simultaneous breakout sessions, and I was at a different session on the day that you spoke. So I've not actually heard your paper. So I thought maybe we'd begin right there. Could you give us a sort of précis or summary of the paper you presented about the Declaration and the state constitutions, and maybe also a bit about how it was received and how your thinking on it developed in light of the kind of feedback and conversation you had with some people back in March?
Absolutely. Well, let me start by wishing you, as I wished those in attendance at the panel, a happy 250th anniversary of the first state constitutions, which the first of which predated the Declaration of Independence by about 6 months. And so we're actually coming up on a particularly big anniversary there. June 12th is the 250th anniversary of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which is the first declaration of rights that we find from an American colony, in the Revolutionary era, and has an outsized impact on both the Declaration of Independence itself as well as subsequent state constitutions. So, in terms of the paper, I wanted to explore the relationship between the Declaration of Independence and state constitutions. What does that look like? Are courts reading the Declaration of Independence, in conjunction with their state constitutions? How is it being treated? How was it treated by those who drafted those constitutions? Because this is a live issue. About 4/5 of state constitutions have a provision that looks something like the Declaration of Independence's famous second paragraph, so that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we get very similar language in again about 4/5 of the state constitutions. About 1/4 of state constitutions actually quote the Declaration directly, as opposed to quoting their sort of common ancestor. And then the other part of the paper that I touch on is this underexplored relationship between the congressional enabling acts for the states under which Congress said to a given territory, you can become a state, you can form a state constitution, a state government, provided that such is not repugnant to the United States Constitution, that it is Republican in form. And subsequently, after sort of the first several decades of this, beginning with Nevada and leading into the modern day, 1/3 of states have written into those enabling acts, provided that their state constitution be not repugnant to the principles of the Declaration of Independence. And so what does this mean? The principles of the Declaration of Independence. Is this a sort of incorporation of that document? Can it lend itself to interpretation of those state constitutions? And again, this is something that is fairly underexplored. The most frequent exploration of the Declaration of Independence in sort of legal academia is tends to be on the part of those who believe that the Declaration of Independence has a particular role in interpreting the United States Constitution. Whether it's sort of some key or cipher for that document. They were, of course, written, over a decade apart and by different people, some of the same, but whether or not there's some special role for that document in the interpretation of the federal Constitution. And so really what I've decided to do instead is to sidestep that question and say, whether there is or not, and to be clear, the prevailing view is that there is not. But regardless of that, my thought is that there's a much stronger case that the Declaration does have a role to play in state constitutional interpretation, because many of these states are actually quoting its language directly, or if not, are quoting very similar language, and then often reading in the Declaration as they interpret that in different court opinions. And so that was the general idea, and it was part of a panel presentation. One of the papers did explore the idea that the Declaration should be viewed as a key to the U.S. Constitution, and another paper explored deeper the thought of Thomas Jefferson. So it was a great experience doing the panel, and I'm fairly new to academia, and so it was my first academic conference, and I suppose they're all downhill from here. I don't know how you can top the Ciceronian Society conference, which really was a great experience, even notwithstanding 3 additional days in Omaha due to weather.
Yeah, I think we'll all remember that for a good long time. But nobody's fault, of course. But, Right. Well, I wonder. I'm thinking like a philosopher because that's my field. But is it really possible for you to successfully dodge the philosophical question of the authority of the Declaration? I know there are a variety of strongly held opinions about this regarding the federal Constitution. It sounds like from the story you're telling, some of the state constitution writers and ratifiers were quite deliberate in speaking of principles and almost of a kind of national philosophy, which would serve at least as a sort of background check on anything that the Constitution is going to do or be interpreted to do. Does that is that a source then of authority, which then judges and legislators and other people interpreting the state constitutions have to account for and respect?
Well, I think it certainly is, and I think that you're absolutely right that the people who drafted these did so with a lot of intentionality. Carl Becker, who is the sort of godfather of Declaration of Independence historiography, he writes that he says the philosophy of the Declaration may still be seen in the state constitutions, perfunctorily safeguarding the liberties of mankind. But he kind of views this as more the product of inertia and sort of reverence of tradition than actual rights-bearing provisions that guarantee substantive rights under the state constitution. So he says the persistence of the political philosophy of the Declaration in the state constitutions must be mainly attributed to the conventional acceptance of a great tradition. Instead, he says that, look, the writers of these things are somewhat wary of revolutionary change, and instead they want to conserve what they have received from the American Revolution. To the extent that was ever true, I think it was only true for the first couple of decades, before the slavery issue gets really ignited in the United States with the debate over a state constitutional issue that is that which results in the Missouri Compromise. So whether or not the federal government has the authority to preclude Missourians from having legal slavery and serving as a state. And so here we have already, as you say, a state constitutional issue triggering this national crisis. And at this time of national crisis, the Constitution doesn't say much about this. The Northwest Ordinance, of course, did, but it didn't apply here. And so grasping for authority, both sides of this debate really latch on to the Declaration of Independence, but they emphasize different aspects of its famous preamble. And so those who were anti-slavery, latched onto this language about all men are created equal, whereas those who were pro-slavery in the territories, or at least not against it, latched onto this idea of the consent of the governed being the guiding principle. And so you see this split right from the start, and this split really broadens as the party of Jefferson splits from the words of Jefferson. And we see this kind of this crack up here.
Yeah, is this a live issue still, you think, in jurisprudence and constitutional issues in the 21st century, or has it escaped its historical confines?
No, very, very much a live issue today. In fact, let me just direct you to a couple of pretty recent cases. So one here one in Indiana and one in Kansas from 2023 and 2019. Neither bastions of liberalism, you might say, but in both cases, both of those states have constitutions that directly cite or directly quote the language of the Declaration of Independence. And I've dug into the convention records of those states, and it's very clear how they came to that determination, why they came to that determination to include that language. But now we've got two state Supreme Courts in the last few years reading into that declaration language a right to abortion. And so it's very much a live issue as to how to interpret these things. And if you look at the way the interpretation goes forward, I mean, there's plenty of discussion in those constitutional conventions about those provisions. In Indiana, there's this incredible exchange from U.S. Senator John Pettit, who was serving in the state constitutional convention at the time, and he gives sort of this preview of his famous speech on the Senate floor, in which he refers to the Declaration's assertion of equality as a self-evident lie. Well, here he kind of rehearses the earlier draft. This is a year or two beforehand. He says that the language of Indiana's 1816 Constitution, quote, that all men are born equally free and independent was, and he refers to this as, quote, a falsehood in fact and is not true. So he expresses his desire instead, quote, that the section will be dropped or abandoned, and if not, that it may be so modified as to read, all white persons of this state are born free and equal and have certain rights, etc., end quote. So he ends up being rebutted pretty dramatically by some of his fellow delegates. One of them states, if the doctrine of the natural equality of man is a lie, as so vehemently declared by Pettit, it has been the most glorious lie on record. With this lie inscribed upon their banners, with this lie impressed upon their hearts, our forefathers achieved the victory of liberty over tyranny. So the convention not only rejects Pettit's proposal, but also intentionally replaced that earlier provision which was based on the Virginia Declaration of Rights with one based on the Declaration of Independence. And they are very clear about that. What the Indiana court does in this abortion decision is say, oh, look, it's based on the Declaration of Independence, so let's read the philosophy of John Locke and see what that means. And, John Locke's influence on the founding generation is I think, fairly overstated. Certainly, by the time you get to the mid-19th century, his influence on, Indianans' reading of John Locke would be grossly overstated. And so, if you were to follow the idea that the laws, mean what they meant at the time they were promulgated, then John Locke has no bearing on the interpretation of the Indiana Constitution.
Yes, I can see what you mean. I mean, highly relevant for today if it's showing up in court cases like this. Another sort of philosopher's textual reading question that comes up to my mind. Do you think there is a pretty strict separation between the kind of authority that these words have appearing in a constitution, where they were put there, you said, kind of intentionally, deliberately, after a great deal of debate, by a vote of the people's delegates and representatives, versus its appearance in a document that's not a constitution, like, a Declaration of Rights or the Declaration of Independence? Is the one could be argued to be rhetorical? Is that not available as an interpretation of the same type of words appearing in a constitution?
No, I think that's spot on. And so, and unfortunately, it's not always honored, but I think that is accurate. Right. The Declaration of Independence is this, grand sweeping, masterful work of rhetoric. It is a juridical document. It has some kind of legal character. And our friend Paul DEHART has written, fantastically upon this. Shout out to Paul if he's listening. But the Declaration clearly has something of the character of a legal enactment, even as it is not necessarily relevant to present day constitutional interpretation. At least not in a very direct way. Now, on the other hand, when you have a state constitution and they've inserted this language here, it's a lot harder to say it doesn't mean anything. A state constitution is a very powerful piece of law. And if you just look at the United States Constitution and you look at the Supremacy Clause in Article 5, it does knock the state constitution down several pegs, that the federal constitution is supreme and federal law and treaties and such forth, notwithstanding what is found in state constitutions. But nonetheless, that leaves a pretty broad latitude for action and for insertion of these things into state constitutions. And the framers of these documents knew that these words had power. As early as 1783 in Massachusetts, courts in Massachusetts actually judicially got rid of slavery. And so you get this in the case of Commonwealth v. Jennison, an enslaved man named Quock Walker who sues for his freedom. And the court reads this language, which was written by John Adams, who is, of course, a member of the drafting committee for the Declaration of Independence, and would have been very familiar with the source material that we'll talk about a little bit later here. But the court reads this and says, well, look, if all men are born free, this man can't be a slave, and therefore he is free. And granted, it took a few more years for the state to finally end slavery, but anytime these were brought, the enslaved people were winning these cases. And so right from the start, we see that this language matters. If you go back, and I guess we can talk about source material for a minute as well. The Declaration of Independence and most state constitutions, as I said, share sort of a common ancestor, and so both of these things are a product of the action of the Second Continental Congress way back in 1775, in the absence of royal authority in that colony, with New Hampshireites having pushed out the royal governor. There's a petition sent to Congress asking, well, what do we do? Can we form a government? What should we, how should we run this colony while this crisis is ongoing? And eventually, Congress writes back and says, you should form such a government as you see fit, that suits your purposes while we figure this thing out. It gives the same advice to South Carolina when asked, and then it gives unsolicited that advice to Virginia, which ends up taking it. And so we see George Mason in Virginia, who writes this draft of a Declaration of Rights. And now the New Hampshire Constitution is the first state constitution. It comes out January 5th of 1776. South Carolina is second in April, and then Virginia is fourth in June. And so in this draft that George Mason writes, he says at the beginning, in language that should be very familiar to anyone who's read the Declaration, quote, that all men are born equally free and independent and have certain inherent natural rights of which they cannot, by any compact, deprive or divest their posterity, among which are the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. And this language ends up being printed and widely distributed throughout the colonies, and this becomes really just a powerful source for all the other colonies as they are looking to draft their constitutions. And most of them end up with bills of rights, which largely track the language of the Virginia Declaration of Rights as drafted by Mason. And now, to be clear, that language that I just read is not the final language of the Virginia Declaration. The convention did what it could to clean up the language in anticipation of some of the potentially awkward for them renderings of it, and so they change it. And rather than saying that all men are born equally free and independent, they say that all men are by nature equally free and independent. Likewise, they say they insert this provision that says when they enter into a state of society, they cannot by any compact deprive or divest their posterity. And so what we're seeing here is what Yale law professor Akhil Amar has referred to, and I think very appropriately and memorably, as legal weasel words. And so what they're doing is taking this language of compact, and they're taking what they knew at the time to be the law. So we're in 1776 here. 4 years earlier, in the case of Somerset v. Stewart in England, Lord Mansfield, who was the Chief Justice at the time, declared that slavery was incompatible with natural law and could only be sanctioned under positive law. And so this language about a social compact and about forming a society has to do with positive law. And so they're saying, okay, if a slave is mere chattel, he cannot enter into this state of society here. And so that language, however, is less impactful in the long run than the language of the draft, because that was just circulated more broadly. This document, the Virginia Declaration of Rights, was finalized a couple of days before the Continental Congress picked out the Select Committee to draft the Declaration of Independence. And so they didn't have that document necessarily, but they clearly had the Mason draft. And Thomas Jefferson and his editors really polished that up and of course, made it into an iconic statement of human liberty. But that's the purer, truer version than that which actually passed in Virginia and which was more influential in the South.
Yes, well, Jefferson's version is certainly a bit punchier, but it's interesting to know of this kind of ancestor document that you say was circulating sort of all around the colonies and being read and published in newspapers and the like, that the people were being influenced by. It puts me again in the mind to think about, you can think of politicians and politicos and delegates sort of acting solemnly on behalf of the people. But when you do that, you see some of these kind of weasel words. And then you wonder, do we have a sort of parallel, I'm just call it like a parallel magisterium, so to speak, of kind of philosopher politicians who are working with not just rhetoric, but perhaps also principles. I'm trying to give play to this sort of the space in which a lot of this disagreement takes place about the character of American political authority, the weight of principles versus constitutional actions and positive law, and the interpretation of it according to what was done and what was said and what was voted on, rather than what was the beautiful thoughts that perhaps sort of preceded it. What do you think about that in light of what you've discovered?
I think that's absolutely right, and I want to read you a few quotes here that I think are speak mightily to that. And so we get, as I mentioned earlier, this kind of awkward sort of interplay where the Democratic Party, the party of Jefferson, finds itself at odds with that which flowed forth from the pen of Jefferson. And so there are several different responses to this. And so the first is what I would call the sort of "that's nice, but" response. And so you get then a senator later to become president, John Tyler, in 1820, referring to the language of the Declaration. He refers to it as, quote, "an abstract truth that does not admit of application to a state of society." You likewise find, something I would call the "well, that's not what he meant" sort of response, and so maybe not ready to distance themselves from Jefferson or say that he was mistaken, but rather say that others are mistaken in interpreting him. And these are famous words of Chief Justice Taney in the Dred Scott case in 1857. He says, "These general words would seem to embrace the whole human family, and if they were used in a similar instrument at this day, would be so understood. But it is too clear for dispute that the enslaved African race were not intended to be included and form no part of the people who framed and adopted this declaration." And that's bad history and bad legal reasoning, mind you. That's contrary to how free blacks in the United States operated, including voting at the time and serving the military. So then you get into this this third response, what I would call the "it doesn't mean anything." And so this is where I think you get the practical men come into play, and they so you get Rufus Choate, who is a Massachusetts senator. He refers to the preamble of the Declaration as the glittering and sounding generalities of natural right. Right. This is sort of echoing Jeremy Bentham's declaration that natural law is nonsense upon stilts. And then finally, you get to this sort of apotheosis here, or I guess nadir, perhaps, where you get John Pettit declaring on the floor of the Senate that it's just not true. "I hold it to be a self-evident lie," he says. And then finally, and for those who were ever confronted with someone who tells you that the Civil War was not about slavery, do direct them to the cornerstone speech of Alexander Stephens, who was the vice president of the Confederacy, declaring that slavery was the cornerstone upon which the new government was to be founded. He refers to Jefferson's lines in the Declaration. He says, "Those ideas, however, were fundamentally wrong. Science," he tells us, "has proven that the races are not equal." And, Jefferson, he couldn't have known this science. It was before his time. But this is where we find ourselves, where we can safely ignore this misguided principle.
Just as a historical footnote, is there any mention in the antebellum debates and the conversation about this, about a fear of association of Jefferson with the violence and excesses of the French Revolution? Is there a fear that if we bring too much of this type of abstract philosophy into the American experience, all bets are off and we may end up as badly off? We may have our own Napoleon eventually. Is that a worry that gets expressed or refuted?
I haven't seen as much of that as you might think. I mean, I think there are undertones of that. It's clear when you see this language about, that it's abstract, or, here's from another U.S. Senator, Garrett Davis, who was then a delegate at the Kentucky Constitutional Convention of 1849. He says, "What is the Declaration of Independence? What is this utopian principle that is so beautiful in theory, but when you attempt to put it exactly in practice, always eludes your grasp? That all persons are by nature equal, and that in the business of government, all persons have a perfect right to an equal share of power." And so there's this great debate going on in Kentucky at the time over attempts to disenfranchise recent immigrants, in the north of Kentucky from Germany, who might be perceived as sort of siphoning off the power of the slaveholding class in more central and western Kentucky. So he ends up getting rebutted by another future U.S. Senator, John W. Stevenson, who says, quote, He told us that there was no equality in government, and that though the Declaration of American Independence and all our state constitutions by their Bill of Rights recognize men as free and equal, that there was no such thing as perfect equality. I admit it, but while there is no such thing as perfect equality, we certainly can approximate to it. If it is a principle worthy of being acquired, let us, in this age of progress, if we cannot attain it, approximate as near to the promised goal as we can. And so we do see this back and forth that happened at a national level in the Missouri debates continue and echo throughout state constitutional debates. With again these various responses. Sometimes it's not true. Sometimes it's impractical. Sometimes it doesn't mean anything. And you get the case where delegates in Iowa do get this language from the Declaration inserted, and courts do use it in Iowa to strike down discriminatory laws after the war. In Oregon, which is having its constitutional convention at the same time, the delegates characterize the Iowa convention as, quote, Black Republican, Black meaning sort of something scandalous or dastardly, not speaking to race here at this point. But complain about that Constitution's, quote, great many grand flourishes about natural and inalienable rights, which they say has produced great controversy, as to whether the document means, quote, that Negroes are equal with whites. So you find this then getting clarified when the Confederate states attempt to secede, and they replace this language. They keep the language of the Declaration, but they replace the words all men with all white men. And so there it's sort of all bets are off.
If people wanted to learn more about this Virginia Declaration of Rights, either the final version or the Mason draft, which you said has been circulated around, is there an easy way for them to find out more about it? Has it been discussed much in the scholarly literature or popular literature?
It has, and I suspect that more pieces will be cropping up. I think the best thing to do is to read the document itself. It's fairly short, and it's readily accessible online. If you go to the Avalon website that's run by Yale, it's a collection of documents, important documents for historical and legal enactments. And you can go there and you can find the whole thing. Likewise, if you want to go and find out more about these sort of declaration-like principles, you can go to stateconstitutiontool.org. And there pull up, you can click on the language of the Declaration, and it'll pull up and the direct quotes from all 40 states that have something like this there. So both of those, I think, are really useful, and you can see how it's been interpreted or how it's been underinterpreted. In my own state of Ohio, the courts have said that, well, it doesn't actually mean anything, and is only really able to have some kind of substantive rights guarantee when interpreted in conjunction with another principle in the in the state constitution. Which I just think is wrong, and really it goes against the canons of interpretation for constitutions, where the idea is that every word that's in a constitution was intended to be put in there, and every word means something. None of them is superfluous. So I think that's a significant error, and it's not been followed by many places, but it's one that I hope that the courts here will correct at some point, because there are significant implications, to these provisions. I mean, as we talked about at the beginning, with these ongoing debates about abortion, but for countless other issues, for economic rights, for conscience rights, there are all kinds of implications that if you go back and you read about these provisions and how they were, how they were come upon. If you read the work of my friend Anthony Sanders at Institute for Justice, he writes a lot about this as well. There's clearly meaning here. It's waiting to be exploited. Planned Parenthood is exploiting it, and is winning cases with it. So I think better interpretations are out there than theirs. But this is live language, right? So as we communicate, as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, perhaps the Declaration of Independence is more of a symbol, something akin to an American Magna Carta, where it's not really on the books, as it were, even as it's in the books as one of the organic laws of the United States. Its legal authority is less widely accepted, whereas again, there's no debate as to the authority of state constitutions, even if some courts have misinterpreted their own constitutions.
I see. I wonder if I can just push back gently on this. What would you say in response to a critic who says the danger of empowering or sort of challenging judges and perhaps other legal authorities to serve as kind of ad hoc philosopher kings, sort of interpreting these principles and applying them to cases, is that's just too much danger there. It's not compatible with the sort of American spirit of self-government. We ought to have a different interpretive framework which takes that power out of the hands of people to sort of read into these beautiful words something that they would very much like to find, especially in an era of political fragmentation and ideological polarization. Do you have a short response to that sort of worry that people would have?
Absolutely. Well, at the end of the day, judges are human, and so were the founders, and this was the system that they've bequeathed to us, and so, while there is some danger that judges can go rogue, at the same time, their job is to interpret this document consistent with what the people have enacted. And so this is something that, I think you can differentiate at the state and federal levels, where the federal Constitution is notoriously hard to amend. It's only been amended 27 times. 10 of those don't really count because they all came at the same time. 2 of them, one starts prohibition, one ends it. So they sort of cancel each other out. And then, several of them are just about voting rights, whether it's about age or gender or race. And so really it's been amended very few times, whereas state constitutions are amended about every year. They're often very easy to amend. In Ohio, a simple majority of voters at any given election can amend the Constitution. And so if a judge interprets a state constitution, it can pretty well easily be amended. And so it's not such a terrible damage. If the people of Indiana want to go in and clarify that's not what our Constitution means, they can do that. That's not necessarily the same at the federal level. And that's where I think the case for something like originalism is perhaps a little weaker than at the state level, where again it's these judges who are often popularly elected are being charged with interpreting popularly sort of revised documents.
That's great. I'd forgotten about the election of judges in the Midwest. That's not a tradition here on the East Coast where I live in Maryland, but certainly part of the constitutions of a lot of Midwest and Western states, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's this great Jacksonian moment in state constitution making where elected judges just really swept across the country, in about the mid 19th century.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. If I could sort of draw things to a close with a practical point, do you have any bit of practical advice that you might give to families, to parents or teachers who'd like to incorporate some of what we've talked about into whatever they're doing with their children, with their classes, with people they would like to converse with and instruct in the America 250 season this summer and perhaps even into the fall?
Absolutely. I think you can do nothing better than reading the Virginia Declaration of Rights as George Mason drafted it, and then reading that which was in fact adopted in Virginia, and then reading alongside those two the Declaration of Independence. And those 3 documents, I think, will give you a nice flavor of what America can be and what it has been. Right, when these sort of moneyed influence, of the slave power takes into its tentacles there and manipulates these beautiful and stirring words of George Mason. versus when Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin really purify and form the words even into a higher sentiment, right? Where Mason's born suddenly becomes Jefferson's created, right? And this idea of that rights do not inhere when we are born, but are perpetual, right? As far as our creation goes. And so, I think those three documents, which were all again written within months of each other, 250 years ago, really is a nice political catechesis on where America has been and where it might yet go.
That's fantastic. That's a great idea. I'll put links to all of those things in the description, the episode description, the show notes for this episode, so people can follow those out if they'd like to. I really appreciate you being with me on this episode of The Sower. My guest today has been Nathaniel Fouch from Capital University School of Law in Columbus, Ohio. You've been listening to The Sower, a podcast of the Ciceronian Society. We hope that you will share this podcast, subscribe to it, and check out our other podcast, Cicero on Duties, which publishes every Wednesday, reading through that work with some scholars of the Society. We have a fall symposium coming up in Michigan in October, and the proposals are open for our 2027 annual conference, which will be in March in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So thanks again, Nathaniel. Thanks again to you, the listeners and the watchers. We'll see you next week in the next episode. Bye.